The blood on Sarah's dress had dried to the color of rust, but her hands still trembled as she pressed her sister closer to her chest. 9-year-old Emma hadn't spoken since yesterday, hadn't made a sound except for the shallow breathing that told Sarah she was still alive. The barn smelled of hay and leather, but underneath it all was the metallic scent of fear. Sarah had been running for 2 days. Her feet were raw inside her torn boots, and hunger gnawed at her stomach like a living thing, but she couldn't stop. Not when the Garrett brothers were still out there looking for what their father called his property. Not when Emma's bruised face reminded her of what happened to girls who stayed too long in places where they didn't belong. The barn door creaked. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as heavy footsteps approached. She pulled Emma deeper into the shadows behind the hay bales, praying the darkness would swallow them both. The footsteps stopped. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "I know you're in here." The voice was deep, weathered like old leather, not cruel but not kind either. Matter of fact. "Found your tracks in the mud outside." A lantern flicked to life, casting long shadows across the barn floor. Sarah saw boots first, worn but well cared for. Then the light moved higher, revealing a man in his 40s with silver threading through his dark hair. His face was lined from years of sun and wind, but his eyes weren't hard, they were tired. "My name's Jake Morrison," he said, lowering the lantern. "This is my land, my barn." He paused, studying the shadows where Sarah crouched. "And you're bleeding on my hay." Sarah's grip tightened on Emma. She'd stolen food before, hidden in barns before, been chased away before, but something in this man's voice made her hesitate. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He wasn't shouting for help. He was just waiting. "Please," Sarah whispered, the words scraping her raw throat. "We'll leave. We won't take anything else." The rancher tilted his head. "What's your name, girl?" Sarah's chin lifted despite her fear. "Doesn't matter. We're already gone." But as she tried to stand, Emma's weight sagged against her, and Sarah stumbled. The man stepped forward instinctively, then stopped when Sarah flinched away. "When's the last time either of you ate?" he asked quietly. Sarah's stomach answered before she could. The sound echoed in the silent barn like a confession. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't lower her eyes. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only made things worse. 3 days, she admitted. Maybe 4. Jake Morrison studied her for a long moment. Sarah could see him taking in the torn dress, the dried blood, the way Emma hadn't moved or made a sound. His jaw tightened. Who did this to her? "Nobody," Sarah said quickly, too quickly. "Girl," his voice carried a warning now. "I've seen enough hurt in my time to know when someone's been hurt on purpose. Who did this?" Sarah's resolve cracked. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe it was the way he'd said her name like she mattered. "The Garrett boys. Their father," he said. "We owed him money. Said Emma could work it off in town." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But we knew what kind of work he meant." Jake's face went stone still. Sarah had seen that look before, on her father's face right before he'd taken his rifle and walked out to face 3 men who'd been bothering their neighbor's daughter. He'd never come home. "Please don't take my sister," Sarah begged, pulling Emma closer. "I know we don't got no right to be here, but she's all I got left. I'll work for you. I'll do anything. Just don't send us back to town." The rancher was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she'd made a mistake. Maybe he was like the others. Maybe that kindness in his eyes was just another trap. Then he set the lantern on a wooden crate and crouched down to their level. "What's your sister's name?" "Emma." "Emma," he repeated gently. "Can you look at me, Emma?" The little girl didn't respond. Her eyes stared at nothing, wide and empty. Jake's expression darkened. "The Garretts did this." Sarah nodded. He stood slowly, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. For a moment Sarah thought he might walk away, might leave them there in the dark. Instead he picked up the lantern and headed for the barn door. "Where are you going?" Sarah called after him. He paused in the doorway. "To get you both some food, and to send word to town that I've got 2 hands working for me now." If anyone comes asking questions, they can talk to me. But as his footsteps faded toward the house, Sarah heard something else, the distant sound of horses, riding hard through the night. The horses came at dawn, their hoofbeats drumming against the hard-packed earth like thunder before a storm. Sarah counted them through a crack in the barn wall, 6 riders, all wearing the kind of confident slouch that meant they were used to getting what they came for. Tom Garrett rode at the front, his bulk filling the saddle like a sack of grain. His sons flanked him, Billy with his dead eyes and crooked smile, and Marcus with the quick hands that had left marks on Emma's arms. Behind them rode 3 men, Sarah didn't recognize, but their tied-down guns and the way they scanned the ranch buildings told her everything she needed to know. Jake Morrison stepped out of his house like he'd been expecting them. He'd shaved and put on a clean shirt, but his gun belt sat low on his hips. Sarah had seen enough men prepare for violence to recognize the signs. Jake's voice carried clearly across the yard, kind of early for a social call. Garrett's laugh was ugly. Cut the pleasantries, Morrison. I know you got something belongs to me. Don't recall borrowing anything from you lately. 2 girls ran off with money that wasn't theirs. Garrett spat into the dust. I got legal claim on both of them till their debts paid. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Legal claim, the words every orphan learned to fear. When parents died owing money, sometimes their children inherited more than grief. Jake stepped closer to the mounted men. What kind of debt we talking about? Their daddy borrowed $50 before he died. Interest makes it about $200 now. Garrett's smile was all teeth. The older one's got strong hands. She can work in my kitchens. The little one, he shrugged. I got other plans for her. Over my dead body. The words came out flat and final. Sarah pressed her face closer to the crack in the barn wall. Jake Morrison stood alone in his yard, facing 6 armed men, and he looked about as worried as a man discussing the weather. Billy Garrett's hand drifted toward his gun. That can be arranged, old man. Billy. Tom held up a hand. No need for unpleasantness. Morrison, you seem like a reasonable man. I'll take the girls off your hands, and we'll forget you interfered with my business. Can't do that, Tom. Why not? Jake adjusted his hat, the gesture casual but somehow threatening. Because they work for me now. Signed contracts and everything. Contracts, Marcus laughed. Since when do you need contracts for a couple of runaway? Since I decided I did. Jake's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. You got paperwork says they owe you money. Let's see it. Tom Garrett's face flushed red. Don't need paperwork for what's mine by right. Funny thing about rights, Tom, they usually come with documentation. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. Sarah held her breath, watching Jake face down 6 men with nothing but words, and the iron certainty in his voice. She'd never seen anyone stand up to the Garretts before. She'd never seen anyone win. Then Tom Garrett reached for his rifle. The barn door burst open just as the first shot cracked across the yard. Jake Morrison dove through the opening, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. Outside, men were shouting, horses were screaming, and Sarah could smell gunpowder on the morning air. Stay down, Jake gasped, pressing his back against the barn wall. Both of you stay down. Sarah pulled Emma deeper into the hay, her heart hammering against her ribs. Are you hurt bad? I've had worse. Jake checked his revolver, counting bullets. But we got a problem. Tom's got men watching the back of the barn now. We're pinned. What do we do? Jake looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Sarah saw him taking in her torn dress, her tangled hair, the fierce way she held her sister. How old are you, girl? 17. 17. He shook his head. Hell of a thing being 17 and having to fight the whole world alone. I ain't alone, Sarah said quietly. Something shifted in Jake's expression. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished with age. My daughter wore this. She'd be about your age now, if the fever hadn't taken her. Sarah stared at the locket. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Jake pressed the locket into her hand. This ain't about contracts or debts or any of that legal nonsense. This is about two girls who deserve better than what Tom Garrett's got planned for them. Outside, Tom's voice boomed across the yard. Morrison, send them out, and nobody else has to get hurt. Jake called back. Already told you, Tom. They work for me now. For how long? You gonna keep them locked in that barn forever? Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Sarah with something like sadness in his eyes. He's not wrong, you know. I can't keep you safe forever. Tom's got money, connections, if he wants to make trouble. So what are you saying? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying maybe there's another way. Jake reloaded his gun with practiced efficiency. But it's gonna require trust, on both sides. Sarah looked down at Emma, who had finally lifted her head, and was staring at the silver locket in Sarah's palm.
Oh.
For the first time in days, there was something like awareness in the little girl's eyes. Emma, Sarah breathed. Emma's voice came out cracked and small. Pretty. It was the first word she'd spoken since the Garretts had taken them. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. Jake smiled, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. Yeah, sweetheart, it's pretty, and you know what? Pretty things deserve to be protected. Another shot splintered the barn door. Jake checked his gun one more time. Sarah, do you trust me? Sarah looked at the man who'd fed them, sheltered them, and now stood bleeding in a barn, surrounded by enemies, all for two girls he barely knew. She thought about his daughter's locket, warm in her palm. She thought about the way he'd said Emma's name like it mattered. Yeah, she said, I trust you. Jake Morrison walked out of the barn with his hands raised, but his gun still in its holster. The morning sun caught the silver star pinned to his vest, a star that hadn't been there before. Tom, he called out, his voice carrying clear across the yard. Got something to show you. Tom Garrett squinted at the badge. What the hell is that supposed to be? Deputy Marshal's commission. Came in on last night's stage. Jake's smile was sharp as winter wind. Turns out the territorial government's been getting complaints about certain business practices in this county. Human trafficking, specifically. Billy Garrett's hand froze halfway to his gun. You're bluffing, am I? Jake reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out an official-looking paper. Federal warrant for the arrest of Thomas Garrett and associates on charges of forced servitude and trafficking of minors. Funny how paperwork works, Tom. Sometimes it shows up right when you need it. Sarah watched from the barn as the color drained from Tom Garrett's face. That's impossible. You're just a rancher. Was a rancher, Jake corrected. Turns out the territory needs good men willing to stand up to bullies. And I got tired of watching girls like these get hurt while decent folks looked the other way. Tom's voice turned desperate. They owe me money. Legal debt. Based on what? Gambling debts from a dead man. Interest rates that'd make a loan shark blush. Jake shook his head. Judge Patterson's been real interested in your business practices, Tom. Real interested. The standoff stretched for heartbeats. Then Marcus Garrett made his choice, spurring his horse toward the hills. His brother followed. One by one the hired guns decided they had better places to be. Tom Garrett sat alone on his horse, his empire crumbling around him like sand. This ain't over, Morrison. Yes, it is. Jake's hand rested easy on his gun butt. Pack your things, Tom. You got till sunset to be out of the county. After that you'll be wearing federal chains. As the Garretts rode away in defeat, Jake turned back to the barn. Sarah stepped out, still clutching Emma's hand and the silver locket. Is it really over? She asked. It's over. Jake unpinned the marshal's star and tucked it away. Territory offered me the job after I sent word about what was happening here. Figured it was time someone stood up for folks who couldn't stand up for themselves. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. What happens to us now? Jake looked at the two sisters, standing there in his yard like lost birds who'd finally found safe harbor.
Well,
I still need help running this ranch, and Emma's gonna need time to heal, proper food, maybe some schooling, if you're both willing to stay, both of us. Sarah's voice caught. Together, both of you belong here, Jake said simply. For as long as you want. Emma spoke then, her voice stronger than before. Can I really keep the pretty necklace? Jake knelt down to her level. It's yours now, sweetheart. Pretty things should belong to pretty girls. Years later, when Sarah had children of her own playing in that same yard, she would remember the morning everything changed. She would remember a man who chose to stand when others walked away, who saw two throwaway girls and decided they were worth fighting for. She would remember the weight of that silver locket in her palm, and the sound of horses riding away empty-handed. But most of all, she would remember the moment Jake Morrison tipped his hat and spoke the words that gave them back their lives. Both of you belong here. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ranch where two sisters had finally found their home.